Phone rang at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact time because I just poured my first cup of coffee and the digital clock on the microwave was blinking at me the way it always did after a storm knocked the power out. I hadn't bothered to reset it in weeks. That detail always strikes me now. How you notice the smallest, most useless things right before your life changes. It was my son, Daniel. Dad, I've been talking to Renata, my attorney, and we think it's time to move forward with the property transfer. The farmhouse. We need you to sign the paperwork this week. I stood there holding my coffee mug with both hands the way old men do when their joints ache, and I said, "Good morning to you too, son." He didn't laugh. Daniel hadn't laughed at anything I said in about 4 years. "Dad, this is serious. The property taxes alone are bleeding you dry. You're on a fixed income. It doesn't make financial sense for you to hold on to 73 acres in your name at your age. We've been over this. We had been over it. 6, 7 times at least. And every time, something in his voice made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not anger exactly, more like impatience. The kind a man uses when he's already decided the outcome and just needs the other person to cooperate. "I'll think about it," I told him. "Dad," I said, "I'll think about it, Daniel." He hung up before I could say goodbye. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. The farmhouse had been in my family for 51 years. My father built the original structure with 2 of his brothers and a borrowed tractor. I grew up running barefoot across those fields. I buried my wife, Daniel's mother, Elaine, under the old oak tree at the east edge of the property, just where she'd always wanted. That farm wasn't a financial asset to me. It was the only place on earth where I still felt like myself. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer before my knees and my back told me I was finished. I know how to read a document. I know what words mean. And I know the difference between a son who's worried about his father and a son who's worried about an inheritance he'd rather collect early. I just hadn't wanted to admit which one Daniel had become. It didn't start out obvious. That's the thing nobody tells you about being taken advantage of by someone you love. It happens so slowly that by the time you see it clearly, you're already halfway buried. After Elaine passed, about 3 years ago now, Daniel and his wife Sherry started coming around more. Weekly dinners, offers to help with repairs on the property. Sherry would bring casseroles and sit across from me at the kitchen table asking questions about my health insurance, my retirement accounts, whether I had a plan for the farmhouse. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Grief makes you want to believe in kindness. Daniel suggested I add him to my bank account just in case something happens, Dad, so I can handle things without a bunch of legal headaches. I did it. He suggested I let him manage the quarterly property tax payments out of that account since I sometimes forgot things. I let him. He suggested we sit down with his attorney, not mine, his, to update some paperwork and make sure everything's in order. That's where I finally slowed down. Something Elaine used to say came back to me while I was sitting in that attorney's conference room, looking at a stack of documents I hadn't been given time to read. "Walt, whenever someone rushes you, they need something from you more than you need it from them." Her name was Renata Flores, and she had a firm handshake and a very expensive blazer, and she kept calling me Mr. Cobb in a warm voice that didn't reach her eyes. The documents on the table included a durable power of attorney, broad, comprehensive language that would give Daniel authority over my real property, my bank accounts, my investments, and a deed transfer for the farmhouse into a family LLC that he and Sherry controlled, just for tax efficiency, Renata said. Very common in estate planning. I picked up the pen. I set it back down. I said it I'd need a week to have my own attorney look everything over. Daniel's jaw tightened. He said that was unnecessary, that Renata was thorough, that we discussed this. I drove home and called my own lawyer the next morning. Her name is Beverly Okafor. She's been practicing estate law in our county for 26 years, and she doesn't own a single expensive blazer. She called me back within the hour, and when I described the documents, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walt, I need you to not sign anything, not one page, and I need you to come see me tomorrow." Beverly laid it out plainly, the way I've always appreciated. The power of attorney Daniel's attorney had drafted was not a standard document. It was structured to allow Daniel to act on my behalf without notification, without my ongoing consent, and here's the part that sat in my stomach like a stone, without any requirement that he act in my interest. This is commonly used in elder financial abuse cases, Beverly said, and I remember noticing that she didn't soften it or wrap it in nicer language. She just said it. Elder financial abuse. If you sign this, your son could legally liquidate the farmhouse, transfer the proceeds, and you would have very limited recourse. I drove home through the county roads I'd known my whole life, and I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. 73 acres. My father's hands. Elaine under that oak tree. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and I did something I hadn't done since Elaine's funeral. I cried. Not for long, but I did. Then I stopped, and I started thinking. I called Beverly back the next morning. I told her I wanted to understand every option I had. I told her I wasn't going to be a victim if I could help it. She spent 2 hours on the phone with me that afternoon, and by the end of it, we had a plan. What Beverly helped me understand is that the farmhouse was already more protected than Daniel probably realized. When Elaine and I had done our estate planning back in 2019, with Beverly, not with some attorney Daniel found, we had placed the property into a revocable living trust, the Cobb Family Trust. Elaine and I were the trustees. After her death, I became the sole trustee. What that meant was simple. Daniel couldn't touch the farmhouse without my signature as trustee, and the LLC transfer he and Renata had drawn up was legally impossible without my cooperation. The property couldn't be transferred out of the trust without a formal amendment, which required my authorization, witnessed and notarized and recorded with the county. He didn't know any of this. He thought the farmhouse was sitting there in my name, unprotected, like loose change on a kitchen counter. Beverly and I quietly amended the trust to add an independent co-trustee, a trust company out of Nashville that specializes in exactly this kind of situation. They have a fiduciary duty to me. They review any major transactions. They cannot be pressured, manipulated, or charmed at Sunday dinner. Then I removed Daniel from my joint bank account and opened a new one at a different institution, one he didn't know about. I moved my direct deposit there. I kept a small balance in the old account so nothing looked unusual right away. Then I waited. Daniel called again 10 days after our meeting in Renata's office. His voice was measured, controlled. He said he'd been thinking and he understood I had some concerns, and he wanted to take me to dinner to talk things through. Just the two of us. I agreed. We went to a place called Hatcher's, out on Route 9, a steakhouse I'd been going to for 30 years. The booth in the back corner by the window. The waitress, a woman named Gail who's been there as long as I have, brought me coffee without being asked. Daniel ordered a $28 glass of whiskey and started talking about property values in the county, rising maintenance costs, the burden of managing rural acreage at my stage of life. He talked for about 15 minutes. He had clearly rehearsed. Sherry had probably helped him. When he finished, I put my coffee cup down and I looked at my son. Really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you're trying to hold on to who they used to be. And I said, Daniel, I've already spoken with Beverly Okafor. I won't be signing anything. The color left his face. The farmhouse is in a trust, I told him. It has been for 6 years. It can't be transferred the way you and Renata were planning. And I've added an independent trustee to make sure it stays that way. He opened his mouth, closed it. I also want you to know, I said, that I filed a report with the Tennessee Adult Protective Services Office. Not a criminal complaint, just a record. Beverly advised me to create a paper trail, so I did. Daniel stood up. His chair scraped back so hard that Gail looked over from the bar. He said something. His voice was low, shaking. Something about how I was paranoid, how I'd always been difficult, how everything he'd done was for my benefit. Sit down, I said quietly. He didn't sit down. He left. He walked out of Hatcher's, and I watched him through the window get into his car and pull out of the parking lot fast, gravel popping under his tires. Gail came over after a minute and refilled my coffee without saying anything. I've always liked that about her. 3 weeks later, I got a certified letter from Renata Flores' firm. It was dressed up in legal language, but the substance of it was simple. Daniel believed I lacked the mental capacity to manage my affairs, and he was pursuing a guardianship petition through the county court. If you've never encountered a guardianship petition, let me explain what one means. It means going before a judge and arguing that someone is so diminished, mentally, cognitively, that they cannot make decisions for themselves. If granted, a guardian takes control of that person's life, their finances, their property, their daily decisions. It was the move I should have seen coming. When manipulation fails, some people escalate. I'd seen it in my engineering career. Contractors who couldn't win on merit starting a fight dirty. I just never thought I'd see it from my own son. I called Beverly before the letter was even fully out of the envelope. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, this is what we're going to do." Beverly moved fast. She arranged for me to undergo a comprehensive cognitive evaluation with a neuropsychologist in Knoxville, Dr. Harriet Sims, one of the most respected in the state. The evaluation took 3 hours and covered memory, reasoning, executive function, language, and a dozen other measures. I scored in the normal range for a healthy adult 20 years younger than me. Beverly filed the results with the court immediately. She also gathered testimony. My neighbor Clyde, who's known me for 30 years and shares a fence line with the East Field, wrote a detailed affidavit about my management of the property, the decisions I made, the contractors I hired, the judgment I showed. My doctor of 18 years, doctor of Fielding, submitted his clinical records and a statement about my health. Even Gail from Hatchers wrote something. Apparently, Beverly asked her, and she said yes without hesitating. At the same time, Beverly quietly made inquiries about the joint bank account. It turned out Daniel had made 4 withdrawals from that account in the 6 months before I removed my name, totaling just under $11,000, always in round numbers, always on weekdays when I was unlikely to be checking. Beverly said this was a pattern consistent with financial exploitation. She filed a formal report with law enforcement and referred the matter to the district attorney's office. Daniel had no idea any of this was happening. As far as he knew, he was a concerned son trying to protect a confused old father from himself. He went to family dinners at his in-laws, coached his son's baseball team, posted pictures on Facebook of weekend barbecues. Normal life. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in February. Cold, gray day, the kind that makes Tennessee feel like somewhere much farther north. I wore the same suit I'd worn to Elaine's memorial service. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I needed something of hers near me. Daniel was already in the courtroom when I arrived with Beverly. He was sitting at the petitioner's table with Renata Flores and Sherry, who was wearing a concerned expression that looked like she'd practiced it. He didn't meet my eyes when I walked in. Beverly had prepared me for all of it, the testimony, the cross-examination, the documents, but what I wasn't fully prepared for was the moment the judge, a woman named the Honorable Claire Whitmore, looked at the neuropsychological report and then looked at Renata Flores and said, in a voice that carried the particular dryness of someone who has seen every version of this exact situation, "Counselor, your client's father scored in the 92nd percentile on executive reasoning. Help me understand the basis for this petition." Renata said something about family concern, about the complexity of managing rural property, about changes in behavior. Judge Whitmore said, "What changes?" There was a pause. Renata said he became unwilling to cooperate with estate planning efforts. The judge looked at her for a moment, unwilling to sign legal documents he hadn't reviewed or unwilling to cooperate with something else. Beverly chose that moment to submit the bank withdrawal records. The petition was denied before lunch. Judge Whitmore was measured in her language. Judges usually are. But she noted for the record that the evidence suggested the petition had been filed without adequate basis and that the financial records submitted raised serious concerns that she was referring to the appropriate authorities. Daniel's face when she said that. I won't describe it in detail. He's still my son. But I saw something in it that I recognized, not anger, not quite, shame. Whatever Daniel had told himself about his motivations, sitting in that courtroom with those bank records projected on a screen, something in him knew. Sherry grabbed her purse. Renata began gathering her papers. Nobody looked at me. I sat in that courtroom for a few minutes after they left. Beverly squeezed my arm and went to talk with the DA's representative. I just sat. I thought about my father building that farmhouse. About the summer I was 12 and helped him re-roof the back section, both of us up there in the July heat passing shingles. About Elaine standing in the kitchen doorway the day we moved in, 38 years old, laughing at something I'd said, one hand pressed against the doorframe like she was steadying herself from the laughing. About every Thanksgiving, every Christmas morning, every night I fell asleep to the sound of wind in the fields. All of it still mine. All of it still mine. All of it safe. The district attorney's office opened an investigation 6 weeks after the hearing. Beverly told me it moved faster than these things typically do, which she attributed to the clarity of the paper trail. the $10,800 in withdrawals, the documented pattern, the drafted power of attorney that would have given Daniel unlimited access. Daniel was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, a Class C felony in Tennessee, and one count of attempted fraudulent transfer of real property. Sherry was not charged. The evidence pointed to Daniel as the primary actor. Renata Flores's conduct is being reviewed by the State Bar Association separately. I didn't feel triumphant when Beverly told me. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired and sad, the particular sadness of something that cannot be put back the way it was. Daniel is my son. He sat at that kitchen table every Christmas morning for 30 years. He called me Dad 10,000 times before it started to sound like a transaction. I don't know yet what our relationship will look like going forward or whether it will exist at all. That's not something I can sort out right now. What I know is that I am still in my house. Elaine is still under that oak tree. The east field will green up again in April, the way it does every year, and I'll be there to see it. There's something I want to say to anyone listening to this who recognizes something of their own life in it. Whether it's a son, a daughter, a sibling, a nephew, someone you love who has started making you feel like a burden, or like your instincts can't be trusted, or like the practical thing is to just sign the document and stop making things difficult. Your instincts are not broken. Slowing down is not being difficult, and loving someone does not mean you owe them your life's work. My father built something, I tended it for half a century. That's not nothing, that's not a line item in someone else's financial plan. When Elaine was sick, near the end, she held my hand one evening and she said, "Walt, promise me you won't let them talk you out of yourself." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I think she saw things more clearly than I did, even then. I understand now. The farmhouse is still standing. The trust is intact. The co-trustee in Nashville sends me a quarterly report that I read at the kitchen table over my first cup of coffee. The microwave clock still blinks. I never did get around to resetting it. Some mornings it doesn't bother me at all. Some mornings it reminds me that time keeps moving, whether you're paying attention or not. I'm paying attention now. I've had a lot of time to sit with everything that happened. Some nights I'm at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I find myself just staring out toward the east field, turning it all over. Not with anger anymore, that passed. More like the way you examine something after it's over, trying to understand how it got that far. What I keep coming back to is this. Daniel didn't become who he became overnight. And I didn't almost lose everything overnight either. It was a slow accumulation of small decisions, his and mine both. Every time I let something slide because I didn't want conflict, every time I told myself it was just concern and not calculation, I was making a choice. Passivity is still a choice. I learned that the hard way. There's a version of the story where I signed those documents in Renata's office, where I'm sitting in some apartment I don't recognize, wondering how the farmhouse my father built with his hands ended up in an LLC I have no access to. That version exists. It nearly happened. The only thing that stopped it was one instinct. Elaine's voice in my memory, telling me to slow down, and the willingness to act on it, even when acting on it meant accepting something painful about my own son. That's the part nobody talks about. The courage it takes isn't the dramatic kind. It's not standing up in a courtroom and making a speech. It's making a phone call to a lawyer when you're 67 years old and your hands are shaking and you're hoping you're wrong about what you suspect. It's saying, I need a week to review this in a room full of people who are counting on you not to. It's sitting alone in your car on a county road and letting yourself cry for 10 minutes. And then starting the engine and driving home and deciding you're not finished yet. I think about Daniel too, whatever led him here. The pressure of money, the impatience, the sense that the farm was already his by some unspoken right. That's a hollowness he'll carry regardless of what happens in court. You can't do what he did and walk away unchanged. Actions have weight, not because some cosmic force is keeping score, but because the people you become through your choices have to keep living in your skin. That's consequence enough. What I want anyone to take from this, if you're listening and you recognize something here, is that your judgment is worth protecting, not because you're always right, but because you've earned it. 60, 65, 70 years of reading people and situations and outcomes, that's not a liability, that's a resource. Don't let anyone frame it as confusion just because your conclusions are inconvenient for them. Beverly told me once that the clients who fare worse in these situations are the ones who second-guess themselves into paralysis. The ones who fare best are the ones who stay curious, stay methodical, and refuse to mistake kindness for weakness. I'm still learning what that looks like day to day, but I'm still here, still on my land, and the East Field will be green again in April. That's enough.